cold, damp and misty morning when Stan Johnson of Malton, North Yorkshire, entrepreneur and self-made millionaire, developed former prisoner of war camp number 83 into the world's first modern history museum.
I created this museum as a tribute to all the people who served during the Second World War, from the school children to the people in the home, the factories and all branches of the services.
Welcome to Eden Camp. This is not just another glass case military museum, but a series of reconstructed scenes using movement, sound, lighting, smells, and even smoke generators to make you feel that you are actually there, taking part. Our special museum is constructed appropriately within the huts of a genuine prisoner of war camp, built during 1942. This fascinating display holds and reveals to you the vital spirit which eventually triumphed in 1945. The superb exhibits created by experts make your visit a wonderful and revealing day out for all the family. It is the only theme museum to offer such an experience, to transport you back in time and to enjoy and relive those dramatic and never to be forgotten years. In the early part of 1942, a small contingent of around 12 British Army personnel, led only by a corporal, arrived at Old Malton. Their task was to construct a barbed wire enclosure and erect tents to form a temporary camp to accommodate the arrival of the first prisoners of war at Malton. These simple basic facilities were to become home for the first inmates to set foot in Eden Camp, approximately 250 Italians. When the compound was completed, the guards were detailed to go to Oldham to collect their consignment of prisoners. They brought them back to Malton by train and marched them from the station to the camp. For the townspeople of Malton, this was a new experience. They were seeing for the first time the enemy in the flesh. There was a measure of mixed feelings, some of compassion, others of hostility. However, although they were the enemy, they were also human beings, not unlike their own husbands who were serving abroad or being held in similar situations elsewhere. It was an unhappy sight as this band of bedraggled foreign visitors marched their way through the streets towards their new encampment. A scene that was to become a familiar sight as other columns of POWs were to tread the path to spend their captive years in Eden Camp. The museum is located near the town of Malton between York and Scarborough, just off the A64 and set in the beautiful countryside of North Yorkshire. The Eden Camp experience is educational as well as providing leisure and entertainment for everyone and for all ages. Eden Camp won the Yorkshire and Humberside Tourist Board Award 1992 for its themes and innovations. As well as the many huts and fascinating displays, there is an ever-growing collection of World War II operational vehicles, including a T-34 tank, a white M16 half-track, a GMC truck, a Leyland Hippo, the amphibious duck, a Green Goddess fire engine, a Spitfire aircraft, and other displays of mechanical machines of World War II days. Hut 1, the rise of Hitler. Born in Branau, Austria in 1889, Adolf Hitler served as a corporal in the Kaiser's army, and his courage in the trenches had earned him the Iron Cross. The Treaty of Versailles, which ended the First World War, was regarded by the Germans as a humiliation. Imprisoned after a failed coup d'etat in Munich in 1923, Hitler brooded on failure, writing Mein Kampf, My Struggle, the blueprint for the Nazi rise to power. But by January 1933, Hitler was appointed Chancellor, and a huge parade by his supporters signalled his victory. His intuition of what the German people liked to see and hear gave him popular appeal among widely different groups. Huge rallies excited the emotions of young and old alike, reviving memories of the glories of the past. Ignoring the Treaty of Versailles, Hitler began to rearm and restored conscription in his quest to build modern and well-equipped armed forces with which to pursue his territorial ambitions. Britain and France, increasingly alarmed by the expansionist German plans, committed themselves to war should Hitler invade Poland with the Anglo-Polish Treaty of April 1939. Undeterred, on the 1st of September 1939, Hitler unleashed a devastating blitzkrieg on Poland, overwhelming the ill-equipped Polish defences in a few hours. 2 days later, on the 3rd of September 1939, Sir Neville Henderson, the British ambassador in Berlin, presented an ultimatum to Hitler from the Prime Minister, demanding the withdrawal of German forces from Poland. If no reply to the request was received by 11 a.m. that day, Britain would consider itself at war with Germany. No such reply was undertaken, and at 11:15 a.m. Neville Chamberlain announced on the radio,
"This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany."
Hut 2, the Home Guard. Britain started the war at a disadvantage. On May the 13th, 1940, just 3 days after becoming Prime Minister, Winston Churchill said, "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat." The war situation was grave. France had surrendered, and the British Expeditionary Force had been extricated from the beaches at Dunkirk. For the first time since 1066, there was the prospect of a successful invasion of the British Isles. Facing the mighty Wehrmacht across the Channel was the Home Guard. Few had uniforms, and units regularly drilled using wooden dummy guns, broom handles, or golf clubs. These bank managers, butchers, schoolboys, men from all walks of life stood ready to fight them on the beaches. As it was, 1,206 Home Guardsmen were killed and 557 injured on duty, mainly during air raids. 15 medals were earned for gallantry. Although not militarily prepared for war, in September 1939, the British government made plans to evacuate school children in the event of hostilities. The plan was to billet the evacuees, many from city areas, to safe areas in the countryside. The children had a label with their address on it tied to them. They took with them one suitcase and carried their gas masks. But problems soon arose. Middle-class hosts were shocked at the condition and behaviour of children from the slums, suffering from homesickness and life in the country. So badly did things go that when the expected air raids didn't come, 2/3 of the evacuees went home by Christmas 1939. Rationing. An island nation, Britain had to import much of her needs, and in wartime, her people to make do with what they had. As early as September 1939, ration books were issued, but it wasn't till January 1940 that a tentative start was made with an allowance of 4 ounces of ham or bacon per person per week. Then we had 12 ounces of sugar and 4 ounces of butter. In March, meat was rationed, and in July, tea was reduced to 2 ounces per person per week. Soon, cooking fats, sweets, cheese, conserves, eggs, 1 each per week, clothes, and most other things were controlled. For all rationed items, coupons from the ration book were required in addition to money. It may seem strange today, but the health of the nation was better under rationing than it had been pre-war. Yet, between 1939 and 1945, a flourishing so-called black market arose. Food and other scarce items were offered for sale without ration books, under the counter, to those in the know and with the money to pay for them. Hut 3, the Battle of the Atlantic. Britain depended for her survival on the sea lanes. The vast majority of her food and raw material to carry on the war effort was transported across the Atlantic. The most deadly weapon available to the Germans was the U-boat. A spectacular demonstration of their power within hours of the declaration of war was the sinking of the liner Athenia, which emphasized the vulnerability of unescorted shipping. The introduction of the convoy system with escorting warships took the initiative away from the U-boat, although for a time the submarine commanders known as aces still exacted their heavy toll. This loudest and most bitterly fought campaign of the Second World War raged for 5 years and 8 months across 3¼ million square miles of ocean. Over 15 million tons of merchant shipping had been sunk, as well as 175 Allied naval vessels. Of 1,162 U-boats built, 781 had been lost. The U-boat sailor losses were terrible. Of 40,900 men recruited, 28,000 lost their lives. For the Allies, around 32,000 merchant seamen died, as well as thousands of Royal Navy personnel. The ebb and flow of the battle was the ebb and flow of the lives of nations. It was the one campaign of the war that lasted from the first day to the last. Hut 4, Air Raid Precautions. In March 1938, the Home Secretary, Sir Samuel Hoare, appealed for Air Raid Precaution, ARP, volunteers. And by September, 1.5 million people had begun to perfect a host of skills they would soon need to apply. The authorities, expecting bombs to rain on them as soon as the war began, made hurried preparations. New modern gas masks of the latest designs, and identity cards were issued. Church bells were silenced to be used only to herald an invasion. Over strategic sites, barrage balloons were floated in the sky in the hope that their cables should prevent bombers flying low enough to bomb accurately. Anyone with a patch of garden was issued with an Anderson shelter. Named after the Home Secretary, the shelter consisted of 2 curved corrugated steel walls joined by nuts and bolts at the top, with tapered rear and front walls, one with a door. These were set up into 3 feet of earth and covered with soil and turf. Specially designed for use in the house was the Morrison shelter, a steel table-like affair which offered protection against falling debris. To confuse the enemy if they invaded, road signs were removed, as were railway name boards at stations, and many famous landmarks were camouflaged. In the home, windows were taped to guard against flying glass in case of bomb blast. It was the air raid warden in his blue helmet whose job it was to check on the blackout, to usher people to the shelters, and be the man on the spot to aid and inform the police, fire service, and other rescue teams. Hut 5, the Blitz. It was the 23rd of August 1940 when the long-awaited German bombing of civilian targets began with the first all-night air raid on London. The Blitz had started. The intensity of the first few months of the Blitz was quite unlike anything that was to follow. The enemy's aim was to destroy London in one great knockout blow by devastating docks, power stations, railways and aerodromes, and for the first time in history, civilian homes on a huge scale. The Germans hoped that destruction of the capital would so demoralize the people that the British government would be forced to capitulate. But far from reducing morale, the reverse was true, and the people thrown together by tragedy became more united. Over the whole country, nearly 4 million of the 13 million homes were damaged. But it wasn't just London that suffered. Throughout the autumn of 1940, up to 1,000 fires a night were starting in any major town on any one night. Southampton, Plymouth, Bristol, Liverpool, Hull, Coventry, Derby, Leicester, Sheffield, Birmingham, Manchester and Glasgow were among the cities badly blitzed.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to a unique show, the Eden Camp Music Hall. Mr. Stan Johnson, the owner of Eden Camp, welcomes you all here today to enjoy a totally unique show, the only one of its kind in the entire world. A show featuring some of our greatest stars of the variety stage.
There's a famous seaside place called Blackpool that's noted for fresh air and fun. And Mr. and Mrs. Ramsbottom went there with young Albert, their son. A grand little lad was young Albert, all dressed in his best, quite a swell, with a stick with an horse's head handle, the finest that Woolworths could sell. They didn't think much to the ocean, the waves they was fiddling and small, there was no wrecks and nobody drowned, in fact nothing to laugh at all. So seeking for further amusement, they paid and went into the zoo, where they had lions and tigers and camels, and old ale and sandwiches too.
Lovers go down lovers' lane in search of shady nooks. They never look for places that are new. We have found a better spot with buttercups around. It's quite the cheapest love rendezvous. On a starry night, when the moon is bright, there's a place we love to go. Down the valley, where the golden buttercups grow, in the shady nook, by a abandoned brook.
Hut 7, the street at war. Early in the war, household goods were plentiful and the high street shops still well stocked. But by the middle of 1940, prices of goods had soared as millions of tons of desperately needed imports of raw materials were being lost at sea, while bombing was crippling the home manufacturing industries. Clothing joined in as rationing was extended. Garments were made to a uniform standard. Clothing coupons were issued to ration purchases. All were marked with the ubiquitous utility sign. And all were mixed together, court shoes with ARP outfits, for instance. Further down the street, folk might find the butchers had no meat to sell, even if the shopper had the coupons. The best you could expect was a constant supply of corned beef. Make the best of things was the watchword. Exchange your old clothes for new. By 1942, clothing coupons had been reduced to only 48 a year. Austerity regulations dictated how many pleats, seams, pockets and buttonholes you could have, while decoration, like embroidery and sequins, was banned. Even underclothes were limited to 6 shapes. Men's suits were single-breasted, often with fake pockets, narrowed trousers and no turn-ups. Of a wedding cake like this, only 1 tier would be real. But perhaps folk were healthier without all that sugar. Hut 8. Women at war. With their husbands away in the services, many women, desperate for more money, were forced to accept low wages and bad conditions. Under the control of employment orders of 1939 and 1943, women were directed into engineering, shipyards, Royal Ordnance factories and hospitals, wherever extra labour was required. Women had volunteered for war work, but after April 1941, they had to register for work. Now, women aged 16 to 49 could be compulsorily directed to new full-time employment. Those already in essential jobs, nursing, the land army or factory work, were naturally exempt. By 1943, 90% of single women and 80% of married women without children under 14 were working, and in the factories, 57% of the workers were female. As early as the end of 1939, 39,000 women were working on the land, and at its height, the Women's Land Army was 100,000 strong. With their help, an extra 6 million acres were turned over to agriculture. The blackout. During the first week of the war, the blackout was total. Shop corners, curbs, steps and car running boards were painted white, and tree trunks were circled with white. But people still walked into them or tripped over them. Windows were boarded up, painted out or curtained. And at the slightest appearance of light, even the striking of a match, the ever-vigilant warden would cry, "Put that light out!" Hut 9, the Royal Observer Corps. The tracking of aircraft over land was the responsibility of the Royal Observer Corps. Their 50,000 volunteers, both men and women, became experts in aircraft recognition and could identify friend or foe from their mere outline as they flew overhead. By the beginning of the Second World War, British scientists had sufficiently developed early radar to detect the presence of aircraft over the sea. This information, together with the numbers, height, speed and direction of the enemy force provided by the ROC, enabled Fighter Command to scramble British fighter squadrons to meet the oncoming enemy formations during the Battle of Britain and throughout the continent. Bomber Command. Early experience showed that for bombers to fly by day unescorted into Germany was almost suicidal, and to avoid unacceptable losses, Bomber Command commenced night operations. On August the 25th and 26th, 1940, British bombers attacked Berlin for the first time, a retaliation for German attacks on British cities. Damage to the city was negligible then, but the arrival of the 4-engine Stirlings and Halifaxes raised morale and confidence in Bomber Command abilities. On February 22nd, 1942, Air Marshal Arthur Harris was appointed the new Commander-in-Chief of Bomber Command. It was up to him to make a new policy of area bombing effective. To do this required sending large flights of heavy bombers to large targets where they couldn't fail to do damage, even at night. At the end of May, Harris organized a 1,000-bomber raid on Cologne, the largest air fleet ever assembled. This caught the politicians' imagination and boosted morale in the service. Such a concentration of devastating bombing had never been seen before and could be unleashed whenever it was required. Reich Marshal Hermann Goering said, "The Allies owed the success of the invasion in 1944 to the air forces. They prepared the invasion. They made it possible. They carried it through." Hut 10, the prisoner of war. The general feeling of camp life among the many prisoners confined to Eden Camp during their captivity was, considering its nature, a happy one, with a reasonable degree of comfort and an almost surprising amount of freedom. However, the usual amount of discipline was observed by the camp authorities, with roll calls every night and morning. Each prisoner was allocated a certain quota of bread and meat per day. It would be distributed to the POW's own cooks, who would then prepare the food. The day-to-day organization of the camp was under the control of a sergeant and an orderly officer, but the general overall discipline of the prisoners themselves was the responsibility of their own NCOs and officers. It was a camp rule that random spot checks would occasionally be carried out on 1 or 2 selected huts by the orderly officer and a regimental police sergeant to see if any prisoners were in possession of items that were against camp regulations. Any prisoner who did misbehave himself ended up in the sin bin, or jail, or what the Italians called the calaboose, the length of time being at the discretion of the commanding officer. Roll calls took place twice a day, after a valley in the morning and again in the evening. The prisoners never knew exactly when other roll calls would take place. Once the count was made and tallied with the number of prisoners in the camp, the orderly officer would sign the roll as all present and correct. After the Italian surrender, the camp played host to a more demanding type of prisoner, the German soldier. The British guards had to be more vigilant and aware of their presence. After their daily work was done, the prisoners' time was their own. It soon became apparent that many of the prisoners possessed a variety of skills, from metalwork to wood carving. There were many specialists in the art of tinsmiths, goldsmiths, watchmakers and artists, all producing work of a very high standard and quality. Many ordinary products like clothes brushes made from horsehair collected from the farms, also sandals and slippers made out of rope were produced. Whatever the product, there was always a ready market for them, not only inside the camp, but from the local people. Many a local remembers the pecking hen's toys that the prisoners made for the children. On a larger scale, the POWs asked if they could construct a stage in their recreation hut for use as a theatre and to act also as a chapel. This was granted, and soon plays were being written and performed by the prisoners. Life in general was good, for Eden Camp was built as a model POW camp. Hut 13, Russia, the Battle of Stalingrad. Full of confidence from their previous success, the German 6th Army reached the outskirts of Stalingrad at the end of August 1942. Stalingrad was Stalin's city, and he ordered there was to be no retreat. Only on the last day of August did the Germans break through the outer defenses and advance towards the heart of the city. The struggle developed into brutal street-to-street, hand-to-hand fighting, buying time for the Russians to build up their forces. By mid-November, more than 1 million men, 13,500 heavy guns, 900 tanks, and 1,100 aircraft were in the position to mount a counter-attack. The beleaguered Germans had little hope of reinforcements, and the Russian attack, led by the famous T-34 tanks, soon encircled the German forces in Stalingrad. The situation was hopeless, so on the 31st of the month, the Germans surrendered to the Soviet commander. Practically the whole of the city was in ruins. 300,000 Germans and 450,000 of their allies lay dead, and 100,000 were taken prisoner. The Russian price to pay was 750,000 dead. Many were civilians. Propaganda. The Germans attempting to demoralize the Allies. The British soldier and the British people. The Japanese boasting of Pearl Harbor. And this one's aimed at the Burmese. British propaganda in German targeting the Germans. And the British boosting their own morale. Hut 18, the newspaper reading room. Here, with examples from 1939 to 1945, are the front page stories of the whole war against Nazi Germany. History for many, memories for some. Hut 20, the Bevin Boys. When Winston Churchill became Prime Minister of a coalition government on May the 10th, 1940, he appointed to the War Cabinet as Minister for Labour and National Service the Labour Party's Ernest Bevin. The Emergency Powers Act of May 1940 gave Bevin the power to direct workers to where they were needed at any particular time. The mines contained enough coal to meet the demands of the ever-increasing war industries, but enough miners could not be found to dig it out. Despite the warnings of the Secretary for Mines, 80,000 young men needed on the coalface were called up into the armed forces. Early in 1942, the country became really fuel conscious. A Save Fuel campaign was held, but did little to halt the ever-increasing demand for coal. To help remedy the situation in the mines, Bevin declared that from December 1943, a certain number of men from each batch of new conscripts would be sent to work in the coal mines. They were chosen by lots, irrespective of social background or personal wish. By the end of the war, there were almost 22,000 Bevin boys in the coal industry. Hut 21. Fire Service. The Auxiliary Fire Service was created under the air raid precautions of March 1938. This voluntary brigade was trained for firefighting and anti-gas work. The members did their own day jobs and then reported for night duty on a 72-hour cycle. One night at the fire station, one night at home on call, and the third night off. During the 1939 to 1941 period, although properly designed fire tenders were available to the AFS, there were just not enough of them. So use was made of requisitioned vans and taxis towing a fire pump trailer. In August 1941, the National Fire Service absorbed the AFS, superseding the local brigades. When the big air raids began in 1940, 4/5 of auxiliary firemen had never seen a real blaze, but their training held good, as night after night, day after day, they went into action. During this time, they attended nearly 10,000 fires. During the whole conflict, 25 fire women and 793 firemen were killed and over 7,000 injured. Many were blinded by heat or sparks, and almost all suffered ill health from the extremes of heat and cold, from the exorbitant hours of duty, lack of regular meals and sleep, and the constant physical and nervous strain. The WAFS, Women's Auxiliary Fire Service, along with many others, such as the YMCA, staffed the mobile canteens and were often found among the rescue workers serving hot tea to men and women who had come straight from fighting a fire. Closely allied to the firemen were the supplementary fire party of fire watchers, who aimed to locate incendiary bombs and extinguish fires before the blaze grew too big. The Women's Voluntary Service. The WVS was initiated in the autumn of 1938 to help with air raid precautions. By the end of 1938, it was 300,000 strong. Their first wartime task was to organize the evacuation of city children in September 1939. 210,000 members staffed reception areas and others screened the foster homes. Early in 1941, 18 Queen's Messenger convoys, financed by American donations, were put into action by the WVS. Each convoy consisted of 12 mobile canteens with their water supplies, staffed by 50 women, which rushed to disaster areas. During the bombing of Britain's towns and cities, the ladies of the WVS ran incident inquiry points and organized sheltered welfare and rest centers. Some 1,750 active WVS centers were established during the war, and a roll of honor in Westminster Abbey records the names of 241 members killed as a result of enemy action. The Red Cross and St. John's Ambulance. During the Second World War, the British Red Cross Society and the Order of St. John conducted their work as a joint body. The Red Cross had huge depots containing everything that sick and wounded men required. They opened convalescent homes for those returning from fighting overseas and had over 200 auxiliary hospitals and nursing homes, with members serving in first aid posts and civil defense organizations. Over 190,000 prisoners of war were confined in German, Italian, and Japanese camps during the war. By the Geneva Convention of 1929, POWs could be visited by Red Cross delegates, and prisoners were able to write to their relatives through the Red Cross message service, receiving messages in return. The POWs also could look forward to the famous Red Cross food parcels. All this was paid for by the British public, who raised over £34 million, mainly through the Duke of Gloucester's appeal. Radar. The popular press of the 1930s made much of the so-called radio death ray, with stories of mad professors being able to stop aircraft in full flight. Was it rubbish or was it possible? A group of young scientists at the Radio Research Centre suggested that there was a basis of possible aircraft detection, though not of aircraft destruction, using a radio system. The Air Ministry Defence Committee recommended that experiments begin immediately, and development was so swift that on the 16th of July 1935, a successful demonstration was arranged. In it, a Bristol aircraft was detected at a range of 43 miles. In January 1937, they produced the preliminary site requirements for a 20-station chain to give continuous cover from the Tay to the Solent, the world's first air defensive system based on radar had been completed. The chain-home early warning system gave British air defences a great tactical advantage during the Battle of Britain, allowing British fighters to intercept enemy aircraft with great accuracy and regularity. Forces reunion. Were you in uniform during World War II? Do you have an old photograph of yourself or a tale to tell? Please let us know. Send or bring them to us and we will display them in our Forces Reunion Hut, dedicated to recording for posterity the exploits and actions of those who sacrificed so much during those important years of 1939 to 1945. Better still, why not tell your personal story on video in the relaxed surroundings of our informal interview room? New for the 90s, a museum within a museum is under construction at Eden Camp, complementing the existing civilian story covered in the previous huts and the military and political events of the war years. Here we cover the significant world events leading up to and including the first year of the war. Events like the humiliating Treaty of Versailles, the rise of National Socialism in Germany, the invasion of Poland, the heroes of the skies in the Battle of Britain, and the devastation of the Blitz. Further exhibits in the major theatres of war remember Rommel's advance over the Western Desert. The sinking of the Bismarck, and Japan's unprovoked attack upon Pearl Harbor, which brought America into the war. More displays feature the final failure of the German attack on Stalingrad, the disaster of the Allied raid on Dieppe, the Japanese invasion and swift advance through Burma, the outstanding bravery of the people of Malta, Montgomery taking over the 8th Army and his victory at El Alamein. The Second World War produced great technical advances, like the famous engines which powered the legendary aircraft used by the Allies. Here, the Rolls-Royce Merlin, and the Bristol Hercules. And from the German side, the V-1 flying bomb, the Doodlebug. Because of the devastation of the Blitz, which resulted in a shortage of housing, a prefabricated module was designed, easily and quickly erected throughout the country. The prefab was equally easily fitted out with all mod cons. A very functional kitchen, modern, if cramped, hallways and bedrooms. Even with fitted cupboards and wardrobes. And they were well insulated in order to keep heating costs down. Bathrooms were fully equipped and modern. Eden Camp's example is a small museum in itself, containing all the domestic artifacts of the day. Designed to last 20 years, some are still in use today in very good condition. Education. With the introduction of modern history to the education curriculum, Eden Camp fulfills an important role. A typical teacher's comment: a trip to Eden Camp is worth 1,000 hours in the classroom. Here you will find motivation in plenty, enough to spark a barrage of questions, providing a good background knowledge to life during the 1940s. Comprehensive resource packs at both junior and senior levels are available, fully cross-referenced to the national curriculum, attainment targets and levels, in subjects ranging from mathematics to religious education. A visit to Eden Camp will provide stimulation for a full term's work. To assist in the supervision of the children, 1 teacher per 10 children is admitted free of charge. Our junior mess huts are available for school parties to eat their packed lunches under cover, should the inclement British weather be at its worst. Poster painting competitions are run throughout the year, the entries being displayed within the huts. At Eden Camp we also have, for your convenience and enjoyment, a junior assault course, specially designed for children up to 12 years of age. You'll find it a good place for them to let off steam. Photographic vantage points are in numerous locations for that lasting reminder of a great day out. The prisoners' canteen, where you can obtain a range of reasonably priced hot food and snacks. And there are also the officers' tea rooms, where you can relax in comfortable surroundings, reminiscent of years gone by, with a nice hot cuppa and a freshly baked scone or cake. If you prefer, you can call in at our Garrison Theatre bar, where a full range of alcoholic and non-alcoholic drinks is available. There is also the ice cream parlour, where all kinds of cool, refreshing ices can be purchased. Picnic tables are spaced in several locations around the camp, and there is the free loan of wheelchairs for the disabled. The camp is completely accessible for wheelchair viewing. There are also male and female toilets for the disabled. Pets are allowed on the camp. Drinking water is available for them, but dogs must be kept on a leash. Remember to call at the souvenir gift shop, which has a wide range of items catering for all tastes and ages. And visit the prisoners' library, which houses a good selection of wartime associated and educational books. There are mothers and babies changing rooms. First aid is always at hand, and assistance for the impaired and disabled. There is ample free parking for up to 400 cars. And 30 coaches. We trust and hope that you have all enjoyed our video, that to some we will have recalled those lasting memories, and to the young an appreciation of those vital years of an era which should never be forgotten. We look forward to meeting you all again in the not too distant future.